So it said we're going to be sold as slaves. Okay? This is what Scripture tells us. This is what Joel told us. This is what Moses wrote. He wrote this even before we went into the promised land. That we were going to be cast into slavery. That we were going to be put on ships. He prophesied of the transatlantic slave trade before we even went into the promised land. See, that's how I know this book is true. That's why I don't subscribe to the Quran or the Book of the Mormon or any other book. Because no other book tells the end from the beginning. That's how I know I'm dealing with God. That's how I know my God is the true and living God. Okay? No other book does that. Telling us what was going to happen to us, even telling us where we can find Israel. Let's look at the writings of the prophet Isaiah in the 42nd chapter. Okay? And verse 22 reads, "But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none saith restore." Where is Israel? Israel is in prison. Now, aren't we in prison? You got a people that have been enslaved, known by bywords, and are in prison. You look at the African American, which is a byword. He has been what? Enslaved, and he is where? In prison. Let me read something to you. Let me read something to you. It says, today, African Americans are approximately 12% of the population. Now, this is from the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, okay? The prevalence of imprisonment in the U.S. population from 1974 to 2001. It says, we are approximately 12% of the total U.S. population. However, black males constitute over 40% of the total prison and jail population. Okay? Look at who's going to jail for drugs. Now, blacks and whites use drugs, whites use drugs more than blacks. But who's going to jail for drug crime? You look at what Clinton did, and what he did with the crack cocaine thing. About how he said, hey, if you got a lot of cocaine that's comparable to the amount of crack, you don't go to jail as long as you do for crack. That was racist. Okay? That was racist. But it just shows you who's in jail. As far as children, who's in jail more. We fill the prisons. We fill them. Oh, almost a half. And we're only like 14% of the population. Okay, this is from 2001, so it said 12. Okay, let me read something else to you. At current levels of incarceration, newborn black males in America have a greater than 1 in 3 chance of going to prison during their lifetime. So you look in the water, you see 3 black babies. One of them going to jail. At current rates, one of them is going to jail. Got a 33.33% chance of going to jail as a black male. Okay? Even if you look at, if we read about graduation rates, we only graduate about 50% of our children. If you don't graduate from high school as a black male, your chances of spending some time in prison are 75%. 75%. But Isaiah tells us, you wonder why that is. What can we do? Isaiah tells us we were going to be snared in holes and hid in prison houses. Of the 2.1 million inmates today, 910,000 are African American. Brothers and sisters, you need to take heed to what's going on. Because African American females do not fare much better than their male counterparts. 1 of every 18 black females born today will go to prison. This is 6 times that of white females. Okay? 6 times that of white females. We were in prison. But I want to look at something real quick. Let's go back to that slavery. Because we started out talking about how Israel, in the introduction, how Israel was going to be placed in slavery. How they ended up back in Africa from whence they came. They ended up back in Africa after that siege. Well, here, again, we're dealing with the truth. Here, Jesus, before the siege of Titus even takes place, prophesies of it. Let me read you what it says. In Luke 21 and 20. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter therein too. See, this is like a twofold prophecy. It happened before, but it's going to happen again. But it says, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. I want to read verse 24. It says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, talking about Israel, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Okay? Again, this prophecy was fulfilled during the siege of Titus upon Jerusalem. To escape death and slavery, millions of Israelites fled to Africa. The historian Josephus vividly describes this horrendous siege during the Great Roman-Jewish War of between 66 and 70 AD. Millions of Jews fled into Africa among other places, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. Many suffered severely from hunger and starvation during the siege. Their hunger was so intolerable that it obliged them to chew everything, while they gathered such things as the most sordid animals would not touch and endured to eat them. They even ate their children for food. This is the condition right after the siege of 70 AD. So what happened? Hey, those that survived were either sold into slavery or went to other nations. Okay? They lived among the Africans. And when the Africans basically looked upon them as strangers, and the Africans, they sold them to many of the Europeans and many of the Arabs. Okay? That's what happened to us. And many of us, that's how we ended up in the various places. We are all over. It's no coincidence. And you look at it, it's only logical that any persecuted community or any stranger among a dominant community is susceptible to this. Susceptible to being sold. Susceptible to being sold as a commodity to other nations. This is what happened to us as persecuted communities amongst many of the African nations. See, many of us want to ascribe to being African because we are black and because they are black. But brothers and sisters, Africa is a continent with over 50 countries. Very diverse. All these people are not the same, just like whites are not all the same. Okay? And we are not Africans. People are looking at even Barack Obama as, hey, we finally got a black president. It's true, he is black, but he'll tell you he's not a descendant of a slave. He is Kenyan. His father was from Kenya. He is an African. We are not Africans. Some of his forefathers could have sold us. See, it's not the same people. That's like saying an Italian is a German. Or that's like saying a Swede is like a Pole. It's not the same. We are not the same. We are different nations. We are of a different nationality. So don't try to claim Egypt. Egypt was your oppressor. Alright? Don't try to claim them. They were your oppressor. Your first oppressor. Okay? Don't claim these other African nations. Many of them sold you. Just like the whites sold you. So why are you claiming them as part of your history? Because you need something to hold on to. Why don't you hold on to the true history, your history that's written of in Scripture? I'm going to move off that subject. Because we do it because we don't know any better. Because once you enslave a people how we have been enslaved, you strip them of everything. You strip them of their labor, of their humanity, of their sense of self, of their history, of their religion, and you make them a slave. You put them in shackles like an animal. And so now, that part of us has been wiped away. For most of us. Read this prophecy here. Deuteronomy 32 and 26. I said, I will scatter them into corners. And we have been scattered into corners. But it also says, I would make the remembrance of them to cease from among men. See, this is why many of us are getting DNA tests, and this is why many of us are trying to trace our ancestors and try to find out when we first got here. But brothers and sisters, your history does not start on the shores of America or on the shores of Puerto Rico, Brazil, or wherever we are. Because that's only a part of our history. That's the latter part of our history. But we do this, again, because we have forgotten who we are. We'll read this again. It says, I said I will scatter them in the corners. I will make the remembrance of them to cease from among men. See, we have forgotten who we are. And some of the people of the other nations, because some of them know, but some of them have forgotten.